Some families sell their inheritance. Others sell their daughters. It sounds too cruel to be true, doesn't it? But what if I told you this story? One that begins with a young woman sold as a virgin to the most feared man in America, is not about submission, but about strength. That behind all the pain, there's a love so intense it defies fate. This story will shake you. It'll make you angry, make your heart race, and maybe, just maybe, make you believe that even the coldest hearts can surrender when they meet the right person. If you have the courage to listen until the end, get ready because what begins as revenge ends in redemption. Now, drop a comment below and tell us where you're listening from. And if this already touched a part of your heart, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notifications, and share it with someone special. Because a love like this deserves to be remembered. The soft rain tapped against the roof of the Bennett house, as if the sky itself was mourning for her. Olivia sat on the edge of her bed, fingers tightly intertwined in her lap. She was 25, and until that night, no one had ever touched her. She had never kissed out of desire, let alone loved. She had guarded her virginity like a quiet treasure, not out of innocence, but because of a promise she made to her late mother. A promise that was about to be broken without her consent, signed away on a piece of paper stained by greed on the other side of the wall. Her father spoke in hushed tones with two men in suits. The muffled voices, though indistinct, carried the weight of a verdict. She didn't need to hear the details to understand she was being sold, as if she was some luxury item, a prize, an offering to seal a deal she never agreed to be part of. Nathaniel Carter. His name echoed through news reports, corporate boardrooms, and fearful whispers from anyone brave enough to mention his empire. The most feared tycoon in the United States, a man whose fortune was rivaled only by his cutting silence and the chilling rumors that his enemies simply disappeared. And now he would be her husband. When the door opened and her father called for her, Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. She walked down the hallway, with a sinking feeling she was crossing a line between the world she knew and one she couldn't return from. Her light blue dress, plain and modest, seemed to mock the grim formality of the transaction taking place. Nathaniel was waiting, tall, imposing, wearing a black suit that looked tailored to intimidate. His eyes didn't scan her with desire or even admiration. They were cold, calculating, like a collector examining a rare piece. Yet behind that glacial stare, there was something held back, a weight, maybe even an old pain. "Miss Bennett," he said flatly, "the contract is ready." She didn't answer. She just stared at the paper on the table. That was where her freedom ended. Her father, nervous, cleared his throat. "Just sign it, Olivia. After this, everything will be different." Different, she thought. What kind of father gives his daughter away in exchange for different? Her voice came out low but steady. "This isn't a marriage contract. It's a bill of sale." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. For the first time, something flickered across his face, maybe surprise. "You still have a choice, Miss Bennett. Sign willingly, or watch your father drown in a $10 million debt he can't pay and crumble." The blood drained from her face. Her eyes darted to her father, who lowered his head in shame. It was done. She had no choice. With a trembling hand, Olivia picked up the pen. The sound of the tip gliding across the paper felt like the closing of one life and the beginning of another. One where I do wasn't about love but survival. The ride to the Carter estate was silent. Nathaniel said nothing. Neither did Olivia. But even in silence, everything inside her screamed. When they arrived, she was greeted by iron gates, colorless hallways, and a staff that looked at her with the same reverence people give to an expensive vase. Left alone, Olivia walked up to the mirror and stared at herself for a long time. The Bennett daughter was gone. Now there stood Mrs. Carter. But every part of her rejected that title. She wasn't property. She wasn't currency. She wasn't a prisoner. Later that night, when she heard Nathaniel's footsteps echoing down the hallway, Olivia backed into the corner of her room, her heart pounding like it wanted to escape through her throat. He didn't enter. He just walked past. But the sound of his presence was imprinted in her mind, along with a silent vow. She would not surrender, not completely, not without a fight. And that was how it began. A marriage forged not out of love, but out of vengeance. And still, on that very first night, as the wind lashed against the windows of the Carter estate, Olivia did something unexpected. She walked to the door, placed her hand against the cold wood, and whispered, "Let the battles come. I won't bow." The black car passed through the iron gates of the Carter estate, like it was crossing into another world. Marble columns, tall windows draped with heavy curtains, perfectly trimmed gardens, a mansion that seemed built not just to impress, but to intimidate. But Olivia wasn't easily intimidated. Even with her stomach in knots and her soul uneasy, she stepped out of the car with her head held high, as if she weren't being led into a prison disguised as paradise. Outside, the staff stood in a silent line, eyes lowered, posture stiff. No smiles, no warmth, just a formality of people who already knew she wasn't welcome. She was a duty, a name on a contract, an intruder. Nathaniel stepped out of the car behind her, his stride firm, expression unreadable. It was as if every stone on that ground recognized who he was. The house itself seemed to fall into a reverent, almost complicit silence at his presence. "Follow me," he ordered, without even looking back. Olivia didn't respond. She simply followed him through the cold corridors, the sound of her heels echoing like small acts of rebellion against the silence. The air smelled of aged wood and an overpowering woody cologne, an oppressive combination, as if time itself didn't pass there. It only repeated. "This will be your room." Nathaniel's voice cut through the air as they stopped in front of double doors. "You have everything you need and nothing more." He opened the door, and Olivia stepped inside. The room was immaculate. Beige wallpaper with golden details, a canopy bed, an unlit fireplace, armchairs far too expensive to be comfortable. But something was missing life. No photographs, no personal touches. It was beautiful, but lifeless. "Thank you," she said, laced with sarcasm, meeting his eyes for the first time since signing the contract. Nathaniel didn't react. He simply turned and closed the door behind him with measured calm. This house wasn't just a prison. It was a battlefield. Left alone, Olivia walked to the window. The garden below looked like a maze of perfectly shaped hedges. Everything screamed control, power, image, and she hated it. She hated the forced perfection, the silence that roared louder than any words. She hated him. That night at dinner, the table was large enough for 20, but only 2 places were set, one for her, one for Nathaniel, all the way at the opposite end. The distance between them was symbolic. He didn't speak. He just cut his meat with precision and ate as if she didn't exist. Olivia, for her part, kept her gaze steady and didn't touch her fork. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked. Without looking up, she didn't hesitate. "I'm disgusted by all of this." The fear comes later. A muscle in his jaw twitched, and then a faint smile appeared, not of amusement, but of challenge, as if he had found a spark where he expected submission. In the days that followed, the routine was strict. Olivia woke with sunlight filtering through the heavy curtains, came down for breakfast, and was ignored by everyone as if she were invisible. She had the freedom to walk the grounds, but the high walls and discreet guards constantly reminded her that freedom there was just a polished illusion. She began studying the staff, the paths, the locked doors, the times Nathaniel left and returned. She watched everything, and behind every quiet step, she planted a seed of rebellion. One afternoon, while crossing the main hallway, she saw Nathaniel speaking on the phone. He looked tense, his right hand pressed against the window, eyes fixed on nothing. "I don't care what they think. She's here, and that's exactly where she needs to be," he said, his tone dark that Olivia's stomach turned. This wasn't just about death. There was something more, something personal. That night, she chose to dine in a simple white dress, hair down, lips red, not to please him, but to provoke him. She sat at the table, and when he arrived, she didn't look away. "Trying to get a reaction out of me?" he asked, pouring himself a glass of wine. "No, I'm just reminding myself of who I am, since everything else around here seems designed to erase me." Nathaniel held his glass in the air as if to toast something, but there was no celebration in his eyes, only tension, a growing unease. She was getting to him. They didn't scream. They didn't argue. But the war between them was obvious in every calculated word, every quiet stare, every silence stretched too long. And the more Nathaniel tried to stay in control, the more Olivia showed she wouldn't be tamed. Then one morning, as golden light streamed through the stained glass windows of the hall, Olivia walked alone toward the library. She heard his footsteps behind her, slow, heavy. She didn't turn, starting to understand how things work around here. His voice came low, almost a whisper. Olivia stopped, took a deep breath, and answered without turning. "I'm not here to understand. I'm here to endure. But don't be mistaken, I didn't come here to lose." He said nothing, just stood there, watching her in silence, as if seeing something that was starting to slip from his grasp. But it was only the beginning. Days at the Carter estate didn't pass. They dragged on like silent, heavy ghosts. But not for Olivia. To her, every morning was a new chance to prove that while they had taken her freedom, they would never take her dignity. And most of all, that Nathaniel Carter had bought a name, not a soul. The mansion, vast and suffocating, had become the stage for a Cold War. With every movement, every word exchanged, they fought invisible battles no one dared to mention. The staff pretended not to notice, but they could feel the tension hanging in the air like a storm about to break. On the third morning after her arrival, Olivia chose to have breakfast in the sunroom, even though she knew he was expecting her in the main dining hall, where their routine had been carefully set. She sat under the morning sun, surrounded by jasmine and hydrangeas, as if deliberately creating her own sanctuary. The silence was broken only by the sound of firm footsteps approaching. "I thought you understood the rules," Nathaniel said, his voice low but sharp. Olivia smiled faintly, without even turning to look at him. "I heard them. Doesn't mean I accepted them." He stepped closer, stopping behind her chair. The tension between them was thick, almost tangible, like static in the air before lightning strikes. "This isn't a game, Olivia." She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his with a calm defiance that caught him off guard. "It's not," she replied. "Because if it were, you'd already be losing." Nathaniel took a step back. For the first time, his expression faltered. He was used to immediate obedience, to fear disguised as respect. But Olivia didn't play by those rules. She created her own, where resistance was her greatest weapon. That evening, another confrontation. Olivia had asked for grilled fish, but was served red meat, what he had ordered for her. "I asked for fish," she said softly, cutting the meat with elegance, though she didn't eat it. "Your requests or suggestions." "Orders are mine," he replied. She placed the silverware down gently, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at him with calm, almost mocking serenity. "A wife is not a soldier, Nathaniel, and I'm not the kind who marches without thinking." He stood slowly, as if controlling every muscle in his body to keep from exploding. But his eyes, oh, his eyes were shouting for the first time. "You're playing with fire, Olivia. I'd rather burn than live frozen," she whispered, not breaking eye contact. That night, he had the West Wing doors locked, the part of the house where Olivia had discovered a music studio and spent hours the day before. A petty move, an attempt at control, but she wasn't fazed. Instead, she began wandering barefoot through the marble halls at night, like a rebellious ghost that refused to be exorcised on one of those nights. They met in the main hall. She was wearing a light nightgown, her hair down, her skin glowing under the moonlight pouring through the high windows. Nathaniel, still in his suit, held a glass of whiskey. The look he gave her was a mix of irritation and fascination. "Trying to provoke me?" he said. "I'm trying to live. If that provokes you, maybe the problem lies elsewhere," she said calmly. He smiled for the first time in days. A small, cynical smile, dangerously captivated. "You're different. Not at all what I expected." Olivia took one step closer. Just one, but it was enough to shift the balance. For a few seconds, she was in control. "Maybe that's why you hate me so much," she said. "Because you can't control me. Because I'm not her." Nathaniel's eyes darkened, and for a moment, just a moment, the ironclad control he always wore like armor seemed to crack. Had she gone too far, or had she said exactly what needed to be said? Nathaniel turned away without answering, shoulders stiff as steel. He walked to the fireplace, threw the rest of his whiskey into the flames, and left without looking back. But Olivia knew she had touched a wound, one she didn't understand yet, but that was about to reveal itself. And that night, lying in her cold, vast bed, her mind restless and her body still buzzing from every clash, Olivia felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't fear or hatred. It was a question whispering deep inside her chest. How far can a man go to hide a pain he doesn't know how to heal? It was a humid, stifling night, the kind that carries an invisible tension in the air. The silence at the Carter estate was deceiving. Everything seemed asleep except for Olivia's heart, pounding like it knew that night could change everything. She had spent days observing, studying the guards' routines, memorizing patrol times, the darkest paths, the least watched hallways. The side gate that led to the woods behind the estate was her only shot. Wrapped in a thin black cloak, her hair tucked under the hood, Olivia moved through the east wing corridor with feline grace. Her hands were sweaty, but her mind was steady. Making it this far was already an act of bravery in itself. She wasn't running away out of fear. She was trying to prove to herself that she still had some control over her own life. And if the outside world swallowed her whole, at least she would have tried to breathe. She slipped through the service passage into the outer laundry area, then crept through the shadows of the walled garden. The early morning breeze scratched at her skin, and the damp ground soaked her feet. But she didn't stop. Each step was a silent scream. I am free. I am free. I am free. Until less than 10 meters from the gate, a voice sliced through the night. Low, steady, and cold as steel. Disappointing. Olivia froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs, desperate to escape. She turned slowly, and there he was, Nathaniel, standing beneath the pale moonlight, his jacket unbuttoned, his gaze darker than ever. Did you really think you could leave without consequences? I tried, and I'll do it again, she said, her voice trembling but proud. Because you have no right to keep me locked away. Nathaniel let out a dry laugh, completely devoid of humor, then stepped closer, so close their faces nearly touched. You still don't get it, Olivia. This was never about you. It was never about wanting you. His voice came through gritted teeth, like he was holding back something ready to explode. This is about them, about everything your family took from me. Her brow furrowed, confused. But before she could ask, he went on, his voice even darker. I didn't marry you out of desire or convenience. I did it for revenge. The words hit her like a slap in the dark. For a moment, there was no reaction, just the rustling leaves and the sound of the world standing still. What? She whispered, her voice cracking. Nathaniel took a step to the side and pointed toward the high stone wall. Every day you live here, every time you wake up and breathe this air, it's punishment. Not for you, for them. Your parents, your bloodline, your legacy. You're the living reminder of what they took from me. Olivia felt her eyes sting, but she held back the tears. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Her stomach turned, her chest ached, but still, she lifted her chin. So you hate me without even knowing me. I don't need to know you to hate what you represent. Your face, your name, your presence. It all reminds me of her death, he said with cold precision. She stood in silence for several seconds, then spoke, her voice thick but steady. What kind of man marries someone just to torture her emotionally? That's not strength, Nathaniel. That's cowardice. His eyes flickered with something between rage and shame, but he said nothing. You can lock me up. You can try to break me, but I'm not responsible for your past. And no matter what you do, you'll never make me carry a guilt that isn't mine. Nathaniel looked at her as if he were truly seeing her for the first time. Something about her unsettled him. Maybe it was the way she held her ground, even while wounded. Maybe it was the way she stood there, unarmed and unafraid. Or maybe it was because, deep down, he knew she was right. But instead of replying, he turned and walked back toward the mansion. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. dining room. Don't be late, he said over his shoulder, his voice distant and forced. She stood there alone under the dark sky, trying to make sense of the abyss she had been thrown into. Now she knew this marriage was a lie, built on something far deeper. But more than that, now she had a real reason to fight, not just for herself, but to unearth the truth he was so desperately trying to keep buried. The hours following that early morning felt like a blur. Olivia tried to sleep, but Nathaniel's words echoed in her mind like thunder. I did it for revenge. The truth had surfaced like an open wound, but something about it still felt incomplete, as if crucial pieces of this cruel puzzle were still missing. The next morning, she wandered the mansion in search of answers. She walked down endless corridors, breathing in the scent of polished wood, feeling the quiet stares of the staff. Not out of pity, nor respect, just silence. A silence that said, "They all know more than I do." It was in the library that everything began to shift. It was the only place where Olivia felt she could breathe. There was something magical among those tall shelves covered with thick old books, a place where time felt suspended, and for a few moments, she could feel like herself again. As her fingers glided over the spines, one slightly misaligned book caught her eye. It wasn't a book. It was an old photo album. Its leather cover, worn with time, Olivia pulled it out gently, and the moment she opened it, her heart skipped a beat. On the first page, a black and white photo of a young woman smiling under the sun, wearing a simple summer dress, her hair blowing in the wind. Behind her stood a younger man, wearing an expression Olivia had never seen on Nathaniel. Until now. The name, handwritten in the bottom corner, made her breath hitch. Grace Hamilton. She flipped through the pages carefully. Photos of trips, picnics, stolen kisses, a life that seemed to have been paused mid-laughter. Nathaniel appeared in many of them, young, carefree, in love. But then, on the last page, a yellowed newspaper clipping. Small, faded, but the headline screamed in silence. Fatal road accident. Diplomat's daughter dies at 24. The article said the car had been hit by another vehicle speeding through the intersection. The driver fled the scene. The name of the person responsible, Arthur Bennett, Olivia's father. The album slipped from her lap as if it had burned her hands. There was the answer. She wasn't just the reminder of a painful past. She was the daughter of the man who destroyed the woman Nathaniel once loved. To him, she was the heir to the sin. Anger rose inside her like a quiet fire, burning her chest, her throat, her eyes. That's why the marriage. That's why the coldness. That's why the punishment. But something deeper stirred beneath the pain, compassion. Because in the pages of that album, Olivia had seen the version of Nathaniel that existed before he turned to stone, a man who once loved with everything he had and lost it all. The library door creaked open without warning. It was him. He froze when he saw her kneeling beside the open album. The silence between them was instant, thick as fog. Nathaniel didn't move, but his eyes revealed the tremor inside him. Olivia rose slowly, clutching the album to her chest. She was your world, wasn't she? Her voice was soft, no irony, no bitterness. Nathaniel closed his eyes for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. She was the only good part of my life. Olivia stepped closer. The album trembled in her hands. And that's why you turned me into a punishment. Nathaniel looked up. The arrogance was gone. What remained was something far more human. Exhaustion. I didn't know what else to do with the pain. For a moment, time stood still. Neither of them moved. Her breath was shaky. His was heavy. And buried deep in that silence, a question began to rise. If he once knew how to love like that, could he ever love again? The day broke under a heavy gray sky, as if the world mirrored the storm Olivia carried inside. She hadn't slept. Not after finding the album. Not after hearing from his own lips that everything had been about revenge. The pain was raw, but the indignation it grew like a storm on the verge of breaking loose. She couldn't pretend anymore. She couldn't survive in that prison without demanding answers, without confronting him. Not as a forced wife, but as a whole woman. She found Nathaniel in his office, the place where he hid behind piles of contracts and silence. The filtered light through the windows cast soft shadows on his face, but it didn't soften the sharpness of his features. She entered without knocking. He didn't even turn. So now you're digging through my albums on top of trying to escape, he said, his voice laced with cold irony, eyes fixed on the papers. Olivia closed the door behind her firmly. I didn't start this dirty game, Nathaniel, but I will finish it. He finally looked up, and for the first time in a long while, there was something vulnerable in his eyes, as if he knew she was ready to break through every wall he had built. Grace meant everything to you. I saw that, but I'm not her. And more importantly, I'm not my father, she said, her voice steady, holding back the pain threatening to spill from her eyes. Nathaniel said nothing, but his fingers gripped the armrest tightly. You chose me as your punishment, brought me here thinking you could break me. But didn't you realize that with every attempt to humiliate me, you only made me stronger? He opened his mouth to respond, but she continued, her voice shaky but ablaze. I lost my freedom, was ripped from my life, and thrown into your personal hell. And even so, I'm still here, standing whole, looking you in the eye. Nathaniel stood tall, intimidating, but she didn't back down. You want me to ask forgiveness for something I didn't do, to carry the pain your heart refuses to bury. She took a deep breath. I won't, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. The silence between them stretched like a thread about to snap. Nathaniel walked to the window with his back to her. He spoke in a low, gravelly tone. I spent years hating every memory, every laugh that echoed in the dark. Grace died because of a choice I didn't make. And the world moved on as if she never existed. Everyone did except me. Olivia stepped closer. Every footstep was a decision. And now, are you going to keep punishing me for something even God wouldn't lay on my shoulders? He turned slowly. His eyes were red, but no tears fell. Just an old, worn-out exhaustion. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. Then stop right now. Her voice softened. Stop running from the pain, Nathaniel. Because when you used me for revenge, you didn't just destroy a life. You destroyed the chance to build another. She stopped in front of him, so close she could feel the restrained heat in that body hardened by rage. I deserve respect, she said, her tone unwavering. Nathaniel nodded slowly, like someone lowering a sword after years of war. But it wasn't total surrender. It was the first step of someone finally beginning to see their own guilt. You're stronger than I ever imagined, he murmured, almost in awe. Olivia looked him in the eyes, and for the first time, there between the cracks and ruins, she saw the man. Not the tycoon, not the monster, the wounded man who might just be ready to listen. But before anything else could seal that moment, she stepped back. From now on, Nathaniel, you'll have to earn back every word, every gesture, every inch of me. I'm not fighting for freedom anymore. I'll fight for justice. And maybe for something I don't even have a name for yet. She turned to leave, leaving behind the weight of a promise. And as the door closed slowly behind her, he remained there, staring into the void like a man who knew she had started to change everything, even him. The news came in the form of a formal invitation delivered on a silver tray. The annual Carter Foundation Ball, an opulent event attended by the elite and, more importantly, watched closely by the press. Olivia received the envelope over breakfast, placed beside a cup of tea she hadn't even asked for. As she read it, a spark of defiance lit up in her eyes. Nathaniel, seated at the end of the table as usual, pretended not to notice. But she knew that invitation wasn't just a social formality. It was a test, a performance, a parade where she, the trophy wife, was expected to shine by his standards. But she had other plans. That afternoon, she refused the dresses chosen by the housekeeper. Pale lace, neutral tones, modest skirts, all picked to preserve the image of the quiet, obedient woman Nathaniel still tried to present to the world. Instead, she descended the mansion staircase in a scarlet dress, fitted and flowing, with a backless design that left little room for her to be ignored. The room fell into a sharp silence the moment she appeared. Nathaniel, seeing her, stood slowly. For a moment, his eyes betrayed surprise and desire, but soon after came the tension. The tight shoulders, the clenched jaw. That dress, he said under his breath when he met her in the foyer. It's not the one we agreed on. Exactly why I chose it, she replied with a soft, merciless smile. They entered the car together, but the silence between them burned. The tension wasn't rooted in anger anymore. It was something else, heavier, more intimate. The ball, the hall shimmered with gold, crystal, and hypocrisy. Fake smiles, hollow toasts, calculated glances. Olivia walked among the guests like a fearless queen. She knew they were whispering. She knew her story was known by many, even if never spoken aloud. The bought wife, the virgin turned Carter, the tycoon's puppet. But there, in front of everyone, she wasn't a puppet. She was the show. And Nathaniel watched from a distance, a champagne glass in hand, his eyes locked on her. He couldn't look away. This woman was not the same one he had brought into the mansion weeks ago. Something inside her had awakened, and it challenged him, unsettled him, attracted him. During the waltz, he approached her. "Dance with me," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated for a moment, then accepted. Their hands met with a silent electricity. Their bodies drew closer, moving in slow, cautious harmony. "Are you enjoying teasing me?" he murmured near her ear. "I'm simply being myself." "Shame you're only now noticing," she replied without looking at him. His eyes wandered along the curve of her cheek, her delicate neck, her bare shoulders. There was desire, but there was more, reluctant respect, unease, quiet surrender. During a turn, she stumbled slightly, and his hand gripped her waist, firm, careful. "You're playing with fire, Olivia," he said. She leaned in, her lips nearly brushing his. "Maybe fire burns less than the ice you carry inside." He didn't reply, but he didn't let go. The music ended, and they remained still, 1 second longer than necessary, just looking at each other. The entire ballroom seemed to fade. There was only them, and in that held breath, just before something greater could ignite, she stepped away with grace and whispered over her shoulder, "Good night, Mr. Carter." Nathaniel stood there alone in the middle of the ballroom, hands empty, and for the first time in a long while, his heart restless. He didn't know it yet, but in that dance, he had begun to fall. And this time, the fall wasn't for revenge. It was for her. The mansion slept in silence that night, but inside, restless hearts beat out of rhythm. Olivia couldn't stop replaying the moments from the ball. The way Nathaniel's eyes had followed her, the grip of his hand on her waist, the unexpected heat in their dance. It was as if the cold, calculating man she had known was beginning to crack. But to what? Desire? Doubt? Or his own buried humanity? She was undressing from the scarlet gown when she heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. Not heavy, so it wasn't Nathaniel. They were quick, tense like someone running from something. She stepped out of her room without thinking, crossed the hallway, and heard noise coming from the West Wing. One of the staff members was rushing down the stairs with a frightened look on his face. "What's going on?" she asked. The man hesitated but answered. "An intruder, Mom. Mr. Carter is dealing with it alone." She ran barefoot, hair loose, robe hastily tied around her waist. Olivia dashed through the hallway and out into the garden. The lights were on, and in the middle of the lawn, Nathaniel was grappling with a masked man. The two rolled across the wet grass, trading harsh, breathless, violent blows. She screamed, but no one heard. A guard came running, too slow. In a split second, Nathaniel took a blow to the face and fell to his knees. The attacker pulled a knife from his belt. Olivia didn't think. She ran, grabbed a decorative stone from the flower bed, and hurled it with all her strength at the man's arm. It hit. The attacker lost balance, just enough time for Nathaniel to rise and disarm him. The fight ended with the intruder pinned down as security finally took over. But Olivia was still breathless when Nathaniel turned to her. "Are you insane?" he shouted, storming toward her. "I saved you," she yelled back, chest rising and falling. "You could have gotten hurt. You have no idea how dangerous. And you think I care? You can hate me. You can lock me up. But you're not going to stop me from feeling." They were face to face now, rage, relief, fear all tangled together. His eyes scanned her face, damp with sweat and adrenaline. Hers burned with emotion on the edge of overflowing. "You don't have the right to," he growled. "Save me," she shot back in a furious whisper. Then it happened. The silence between them snapped with a rough motion. Nathaniel pulled her tightly by the waist. and his lips crashed into hers like they could no longer resist. It wasn't a sweet kiss. It was a kiss of anger, of guilt, of desire caged for far too long. A kiss that burned like revenge, but also like a plea. She kissed him back, not out of surrender, but because she too carried fire in her chest. She too was tired of controlling what she felt. She too wanted to scream without words. When they finally broke apart, breathless, faces still close, Nathaniel's eyes had changed. Less harsh, less lost. "This shouldn't have happened," he whispered. Olivia touched her trembling lips with her fingertips. "But it did, and you know it as well as I do. It wasn't by accident." He stepped back, like a man needing to flee from what he couldn't handle. But his eyes stayed on her for just a second longer. Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows of the hallway. But inside both of them, something had awakened, something that could no longer be hidden. The days that followed were a blur of loaded silences, avoided glances, and touches that almost happened but pulled back at the last second. The kiss still lingered between them, like an unspoken promise or a threat of what could come next. Nathaniel avoided crossing Olivia's path. He buried himself in meetings, last-minute trips, made-up commitments. But his absence shouted louder than his presence, and she felt in her chest, in her skin, in her womb. It was on an ordinary morning, one of those that arrived slowly with shy light through the windows, that everything changed. Olivia woke with a strange nausea, a discomfort that didn't match her usual health. She thought it might be nothing, maybe stress, the weight of a suffocating routine. But when she found herself sitting on the bathroom floor, trembling, her forehead against the cold tile, hands over her stomach, the thought came like an urgent whisper. It can't be. She ran to the library, searched among the old medical books on the side shelf until she found a first aid box. At the bottom, a forgotten pregnancy test, probably left behind by a staff member. The box was crushed, but the seal intact. 30 minutes later, Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the little stick with wide eyes. 2 lines. The world stopped, then spun. A wave of shock followed by fear, followed by an indescribable tenderness. Her chest felt too small for the avalanche of emotions rising inside her. She thought about running, about hiding, about denial. But she knew she couldn't. And more than that, she didn't want to. That night, she waited for Nathaniel in the sitting room. He arrived late, as always, jacket over his arm, footsteps slow. When he saw her standing there, his eyes narrowed, cautious. "Did something happen?" he asked coldly. She took a deep breath. There was no script, no plan, just the truth. "I'm pregnant." Silence. His breath stopped for a second, then returned heavy. "Are you sure?" "2 tests, one this morning, the other just now." Nathaniel took a step back, as if needing support from something that wasn't there. But he said nothing, and that hurt more than any words could. "I'm not asking you for anything," she continued. "Not explanations, not promises. I just thought you had the right to know." He walked over to the fireplace, rested his hand on the marble mantel, eyes lost in the flames. "A child. Our child," she corrected. Those 2 words seemed to crack something inside him. When he turned around, there was a strange look in his eyes. Not joy, not anger, not fear, as if the ground had collapsed beneath him. "I don't know how to be a father," he said. "I don't know how to be a mother either," she said softly. "But I know how not to be, and that's already a start." Nathaniel walked toward her, stopped just a few steps away, looked down at her stomach as if he could already see something sacred there, then raised his eyes to hers. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything I did to you." Olivia felt the tears rise, not from weakness, but from release. "Start by changing. Not for me, for him or her, for the life we brought into this world without meaning to. But that now is all that matters." Nathaniel didn't say anything. He just pulled her into an embrace. And in that embrace, she felt something shift. It wasn't an apology. It was a promise. The Carter estate, once so cold and silent, began to breathe differently, as if little by little, every wall, every hallway, every walled garden was being touched by a new breeze. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. Olivia felt it, and so did Nathaniel. Since the discovery of the pregnancy, everything had changed. He was no longer the same man. He had left behind the dark suits, more often traded late-night meetings for quiet walks through the gardens, and surprisingly, he had learned to listen. For the first time since she arrived at that place, Olivia wasn't just seen, she was heard. The mansion, once impersonal and impenetrable, began to show color. Lighter curtains, fresh flowers in the foyer, the occasional laughter in the kitchen. Even the staff, once so restrained, began to show warmth, as if the baby growing inside her had the power to heal not just inner wounds but invisible scars in everyone around them. And Nathaniel changed with every gesture. He attended the doctor's appointments, held Olivia's hand with a gentle firmness as if to say, "I'm staying now." He painted the nursery himself, clumsily, with spilled paint and crooked lines, but smiling in a way she had never seen before, a smile of someone starting over. The name came on a rainy afternoon as they lay side by side in silence. "What if it's a boy?" she asked, eyes on the ceiling. "Noah," he said without hesitation. Olivia turned her face to him, surprised. "Why?" "Because it means rest. Peace." He smiled. "I never knew what that was until now." She didn't answer. She simply placed her hand over her belly, feeling the life inside her move. And when Noah finally arrived on a clear-skied morning, everything they had lived through suddenly made sense. The baby's cry filled the mansion like a hymn. Nathaniel's eyes welled with tears as he held his son for the first time. The hands that had once hurt now trembled with tenderness. He looked at Olivia with raw, unfiltered emotion. "I never imagined," he whispered, voice breaking. She smiled, exhausted but complete. "I know." In the weeks that followed, life slowly reshaped itself around the new heart of the home. Noah. He was small but powerful. He had the gift of bringing people together with a glance, silencing tension with a sigh, turning the hardest of men into a father who kissed his son's feet like they were sacred. Olivia watched it all with tearful eyes. And though there were still painful memories, something greater now stood in their place. Love. Love that was built, not forced. Love born from chaos, yet rooted deeply. Nathaniel treated her with care, respect, and tenderness. And little by little, what began as a prison became a home. What began as punishment turned into redemption. What seemed like the end was only the beginning point one clear morning. As they walked through the garden, she pushing Noah's stroller, he holding her hand with ease. Nathaniel paused in front of the old stone fountain and said, "You know, I thought I'd never be capable of feeling this, but now I understand. You weren't a punishment. You were my second chance." Olivia turned to him, eyes glassy. "And you were my transformation." They kissed, not as escape, not as a burst of emotion, but as two survivors who had chosen to love in spite of everything. And behind them, the soft sound of Noah sleeping in the breeze seemed to seal that quiet promise that the past wouldn't win. Not this time. Months had passed since Noah's birth, and the Carter estate was no longer the same. What was once a monument to silence, pain, and control now pulsed with life. The soft sound of Olivia's laughter echoed through the halls, mingling with Noah's first babbles and the light footsteps of Nathaniel, who no longer avoided mirrors or his own reflection in the central garden, the very place where it all began, where she had nearly escaped and he had confessed his hatred. There now stood a new wooden bench, placed under the shade of blooming magnolia. There, in that quiet corner, Olivia liked to sit in the late afternoon, Noah nestled in her arms, watching the leaves dance in the breeze. A simple scene, yet filled with eternity. Nathaniel found her there one afternoon. He carried a blanket in his hands and calm in his eyes. He sat beside her in silence, gently covering her legs and the babies with care. They stayed like that for a long while, just breathing together, like people who no longer needed to explain anything. "Remember when I told you I never knew what peace was?" He murmured, eyes fixed on the trees. "I remember," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Well, now I know. And it has your name." Olivia smiled slowly because that love had no urgency anymore. It wasn't born of guilt or desperation. It was born of rebuilding, of healing, of a beginning so sincere it hurt in the most beautiful way. Nathaniel kissed the top of her head, then Noah's sleepy little face. I made so many mistakes with you, Olivia, but if I had to choose again, I'd choose to get it all wrong 1,000 times just to get it right once, like this. She looked up at him, gently touching his face. You didn't fail. You survived. And now we live. Inside, the estate's bells rang softly, but no sound was stronger than what was unfolding there. The quiet ceiling of forgiveness, the sound of love finally finding rest, as the sun slowly sank behind the hills, painting the sky in gold. Olivia, Nathaniel, and Noah remained where they were. An unlikely trio, an unlikely home, but a real one. And when Nathaniel laced his fingers through hers and whispered, voice low and steady, "You are my home," she smiled, eyes shining with tears because she knew. She knew that after everything they had lived, everything they had endured, this wasn't just a happy ending. It was the kind of love even time wouldn't dare to erase. Not all love begins with flowers. Sometimes it's born from thorns, from pain, from loss, from injustice. But when two souls are destined to meet, not even anger, the past, or pride can stop them from finding each other. The story of Olivia and Nathaniel shows us that true love isn't built only on sweet promises, but on hard choices, deep reconciliation, and the courage to begin again. And you, have you ever felt something like that? Have you ever felt loved even after someone saw your darkest sides? Or have you ever loved someone who hurt you first? Drop a comment below. I read everything. Tell me where you're listening from. And if you've ever lived through something that felt impossible but turned into love. And of course, if this story touched your heart in any way, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who deserves to feel this too. Because stories like this heal, inspire, and transform.